As the heavy wooden door of the private library clicked shut behind Cardinal Gerhard Müller, the sound reverberated with an ominous finality. This was a room he had entered hundreds of times over his career, yet today felt entirely different. There were no busy aides, no whispering secretaries, and no recording devices in sight. Only 2 chairs, 2 glasses of water, and a single black folder resting on the table. The cardinal's gaze drifted to that folder, seeing his own name printed across the front, and his blood ran cold. Sitting opposite him was Pope Leo XIV, elected less than a year ago. If you and I were there, we would have felt the chill in the air as the pontiff raised his unsmiling eyes and delivered 5 words Müller would never forget.
The Holy Father quietly requested that Gerhard take a seat, initiating a conversation that was meant to remain buried forever within the Apostolic Palace. 3 days have passed since that encounter, and although no official transcript or recording exists, damning fragments are beginning to leak out. Whispers are traveling fast through the stone corridors of Rome, leaving high-ranking officials in red robes unable to look one another in the eye. Prominent cardinals are suddenly cancelling public events, while powerful foundations scramble to rewrite their public statements. The truth is starting to emerge about the 5 distinct statements Pope Leo XIV made to Cardinal Müller. Reluctantly, Müller took his seat, feeling the ground to shift beneath his feet but refusing to show his panic.
No warm smiles or traditional pleasantries came from the newly elected pontiff during this tense encounter. There were no formal blessings exchanged, no polite small talk about old acquaintances, and no mentions of the Roman weather. All the diplomatic rituals that typically soften these high-level Vatican meetings were stripped away. The Pope simply opened the ominous black folder, letting a suffocating silence fill the room. If you and I want to uncover the secrets hidden behind these closed doors, we must pay close attention to what happened next. Subscribe to this channel now and turn on the notification bell, because the first statement Pope Leo XIV made without even looking up from the page was designed to completely dismantle Cardinal Müller's entire platform.
The Pope kept his eyes fixed on the first document in the folder, reading it slowly before delivering his first crushing blow. Without looking up, he quietly stated that the cardinal's long-standing war against the previous pope had to end immediately. Müller went rigid, his fingers gripping the armrests of his chair as his mind raced. For years he had defended his criticisms of Pope Francis in television interviews and theological lectures, and he tried to protest, claiming there was no war. But the pontiff raised a single, silencing hand, reminding Gerhard that they were alone and there was no use in playing games. The folder between them contained a mountain of evidence, from private letters to public transcripts, documenting Müller's relentless campaign of dissent.
Some of these documents were officially signed, others were leaked anonymously, and many were never intended to see the light of day. The Pope turned the pages in silence, letting the weight of the evidence settle in the quiet room. Still speaking in a calm, level tone, he pointed out that Müller had spent 10 years systematically undermining his predecessor. Ever since Francis removed him from his doctrinal post, Müller had written books, given hostile interviews, and aligned himself with media networks seeking papal ruin. When Müller tightened his jaw and claimed he had only spoken his version of the truth, the Pope finally looked up to deliver a cold, undeniable reality. Pope Francis was dead.
The previous pontiff had been in his grave for more than a year, meaning the battle was over, and the conservative opposition had lost. A profound silence enveloped the library as Müller absorbed the shocking bluntness of the statement. Pope Leo XIV was nothing like Francis. He avoided emotional displays and theatrical arguments, operating instead with the quiet precision of an American Augustinian who had spent decades working in Peru. The Pope calmly laid down his conditions, stating that Müller was forbidden from writing articles or giving interviews targeting the late Pope. Furthermore, he could no longer speak at hostile conferences that used the past papacy to raise funds. When Müller argued for his freedom of conscience,
the limits of his influence became clear.
The Pope reminded Müller that his primary duty was to the Church rather than his own bruised ego. This opening directive alone was powerful enough to bring any Roman cardinal to heel, but the pontiff was far from finished. If you and I analyze the vast networks of conservative support that Müller relied on, we can understand why he felt so secure. He truly believed he was untouchable, protected by sympathetic cardinals in Rome, traditionalist bishops in Europe, wealthy American donors, and aligned media outlets. Müller assumed his advanced age and theological reputation placed him out of reach of any real discipline. However, the second statement from Pope Leo XIV would shatter that illusion entirely. Shifting his focus, the Pope shut the first portion of the folder and opened the next, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. Müller stared down at the document, the color rapidly draining from his face as he asked how the pontiff had obtained it. The Pope coldly replied that the source was irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was that it was now in his possession. According to investigators, the page was an intercepted private email sent by a network of traditionalist bishops, conservative donors, and media figures. This communication detailed a coordinated, long-term strategy to place Müller at the head of an organized resistance. The plan aimed to portray Pope Leo as a mere continuation of Francis and intentionally divide the global church. Although Müller was not the author of the email, his name was prominently featured 12 times throughout the 3 pages. The Pope allowed him to read every line in silence, watching as the cardinal's hands began to shake under the weight of the evidence. Müller quickly defended himself, claiming he had never authorized the document or participated in its creation. The pontiff calmly acknowledged this, prompting Müller to ask why he was being shown the correspondence at all. Leaning forward, the Pope delivered a devastating blow, stating that while Müller may not have written the words, he was entirely aware of the plot and did nothing to stop it. He had allowed his name to be weaponized, accepting their funding and blessing their rebellious conferences. When these factions plotted against the papacy during its very first month, the cardinal chose to remain completely silent. The Pope paused, letting his next statement strike with maximum force, declaring that silence in this context equated to active participation. He pointed out that this very concept was taught in Müller's own books on moral theology. The pontiff recounted how the cardinal had written that remaining silent in the presence of wrongdoing is a moral failing, effectively weaponizing Müller's own academic theories against him. The defender of conservative orthodoxy was left entirely speechless, unable to find an escape from his own standard. Müller stared blankly at the table for a full minute as the Pope quietly waited him out. Insiders at the Vatican frequently highlight Pope Leo XIV's unique ability to weaponize silence during tense negotiations. He does not feel the need to dominate conversations with loud declarations, choosing instead to let the weight of undeniable facts press down on his opponents. Müller felt that pressure intensely, but the third revelation was about to get much worse. If you and I want to follow this unfolding investigation, take a moment to hit the like button. The upcoming details regarding the German Church are the exact reason this meeting is currently sending shockwaves through Rome. Müller, hailing from Mainz, had long used his platform to attack the liberal synodal path of his homeland, accusing fellow German bishops of outright heresy. For years, Müller had carefully crafted his public persona as the only traditionalist leader capable of saving German Catholicism from liberal self-destruction. This manufactured image was shattered when the Pope opened the third section of the folder and revealed a secret letter written by Müller just last month. The cardinal's face turned white as the pontiff detailed how Müller had privately messaged 3 German bishops, threatening to lead a counter-movement against their reforms. He had boasted about his influence inside Rome, claiming he had the ear of powerful cardinals and suggesting the current pope was too weak to last. Müller had promised a traditionalist restoration under his own leadership, desperately claiming the document was private. The Pope did not feel the need to raise his voice as he calmly confirmed that he had the document in his possession. He made it clear to Gerhard that quietness must never be mistaken for weakness, asserting that the German bishops did not require a self-appointed savior because they already had a pope. This third warning struck Müller like a physical blow, dismantling the alternative authority he had spent a decade building as the guardian of traditionalism. He had long positioned himself as the ultimate voice for conservative Catholics who felt abandoned by Rome. In one simple exchange, Pope Leo XIV stripped away that carefully cultivated identity, leaving him with no ground left to stand on.
Pope Leo calmly asserted that the chair of St. Peter belonged solely to him, not to Müller, his allies, or the wealthy American donors funding his travels. For the first time in his long career, the cardinal was completely speechless. As we watch this dramatic shift in power, you and I can see the Pope standing alone by the window, looking out over the Vatican courtyard before turning back with a hardened expression. This was not a vengeful leader, but a highly focused strategist ready to dismantle his opposition. He addressed Müller's assumption that an American who spent his career in South America could never comprehend the complex realities of the German Church, preparing to deliver his final, undeniable proof. If you and I were to peer into that private papal study, we would witness a confrontation that shook the Vatican to its foundations. Pope Leo XIV paused, his cold gaze boring into the cardinal. "You believe I cannot see what is happening in Mainz, in Cologne, in Munich? I have spent the last 5 months reading every document the German bishops have produced in the last 10 years, every memo, every internal report, every statement, every dissent. I have spoken to 27 German priests in private. I have read your letters to all of them. I am not blind, Gerhard. I am not naive. I see exactly what is happening in Germany, and I will deal with it in my way, not yours." The pontiff sat back down. "Stay out of it." That was the third warning, but the Pope was far from finished. Opening the fourth tab of the folder, the Pope prepared to deliver a blow that would shatter Cardinal Müller's composure. This was the moment 3 Vatican sources say the Cardinal finally realized he was trapped. This fourth point concerned money. Specifically, 3 wealthy foundations, 2 in the United States and 1 in Switzerland. All were connected to traditionalist networks with multi-million euro budgets. They funded books, films, and conferences targeting the papacy of Francis and now Leo himself. Crucially, all of them were paying Müller. It was not direct, but masked as speaking fees, book deals, advisory roles, and travel reimbursements, framed as theological consultation. Rather than accusing the cardinal of outright corruption or greed, Pope Leo opted for a far colder and more devastating precision. "You have been a paid voice for an opposition movement, Gerhard. You may not see it that way, but that is what you have become." The Pope turned a page in the file, his finger tracing the lines of a detailed spreadsheet. "In the last 3 years, you have received over 400,000 euros from organizations whose stated mission includes opposing Vatican reforms. You have spoken at 23 of their events. You have endorsed 12 of their books. You have given interviews to their media outlets nearly every single month." His voice remained calm, almost clinical, as he read the numbers. The Pope noted that even the Cardinal's private foundation had accepted massive donations from individuals whose entire public identities were defined by their bitter hostility toward his predecessor. Leo looked up, locking eyes with him. "This is not pastoral work, Gerhard. This is not theology. This is a campaign, and the Vatican has been watching it for far longer than you realized." When Müller attempted to interject that these groups were simply defending the faith, the Pope cut him off. "They defend a brand, Gerhard, your brand, and they pay you well for it." In plain language, the Pope was stripping away his illusions. He was no longer a prince of the church. He was a well-paid celebrity for a faction, and the game was over. Now, you and I can see the profound irony of this moment. Müller, who had spent decades lecturing the Catholic world on moral integrity, was suddenly staring at an undeniable financial paper trail. Nothing about it was illegal, but the moral implications were devastating. His theology had become inseparable from his bank account, his voice bought and paid for by conservative donors. The Pope was about to bring that highly lucrative side career to an abrupt end. "Effective immediately," Leo declared. "You will resign from all paid advisory roles with those 3 foundations. You will not attend their events. You will not publish through their networks. Any future writing must go through publishers in good standing with Rome."
The Pope laid down the law, stating that if the cardinal wished to preach, he would do so within actual Catholic dioceses, rather than at exclusive high-dollar donor retreats. Müller was stunned, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, before he managed to stammer that this was entirely unprecedented. "It is overdue," the Pope countered coldly, "by at least 6 years." Leo let the silence stretch. "You may keep your title, your residence, and your red hat, but the parallel career ends today. Choose." This marked the end of the 4th point, but it was the 5th issue raised by Pope Leo XIV that would send shock waves through the Vatican, because it had nothing to do with money or Germany.
This next matter was not about Pope Francis, nor did it touch upon any of the fierce culture wars that had fractured the Church over the last decade. It was entirely about Müller the man. Slowly, the Pope closed the thick folder, pushed it to the side, and folded his hands on the table. For the first time, his stern voice softened. "Gerhard, look at me." The cardinal looked up, his eyes clouded with exhaustion. He looked significantly older than he had 90 minutes ago, the fight entirely drained from him. "You came in here expecting an attack," the Pope said quietly. "You prepared for hostility and war, and I do not blame you. You have been fighting a war for 10 years now." "You have forgotten how to do anything else," the Pope added, but the cardinal remained silent. "I am not your enemy, Gerhard. I do not want you destroyed, humiliated, or cast into exile. That is not who I am, and it is not who the Church is." The Pope paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in the quiet room. "What I want is for you to stop. Just stop." He waited a long beat. "You are 78 years old. You have given your entire life to the Church as a bishop, a prefect, and a respected theologian. You did real, vital work. But somewhere along the way, you let your wounds consume you, until you became entirely defined by what you were fighting against. Bitterness has begun to define you," the Pope warned, "and it is slowly destroying everything you built before." Leaning forward, Leo made his plea. "As your brother, as your Pope, I am asking you to lay it down. The campaigns, the endless interviews, the networks, the constant fighting, just let it go. Spend your remaining years writing about Christ, not your enemies, not Francis, and not me. Write about Christ the way you did before all of this started." This 5th message was not an ultimatum, but a heartfelt appeal. According to an observer, that was the exact moment tears welled in Müller's eyes. Though he did not break down, the emotion in his gaze was unmistakable. Allowing the heavy silence to linger, the Pope watched the emotional impact of his words wash over the cardinal.
"Truth is not negotiable, Gerhard, but neither is mercy. I am offering you both right now. Most cardinals are never given this kind of choice, and you will only get it once." The pontiff stood up. "Take the night, take a week, take whatever time you need, but know that your choice will define your legacy." The tense meeting concluded without any fanfare or formal protocols. Walking the cardinal to the door himself, the Pope did not offer a handshake. He simply opened the door, looked deeply into Müller's eyes and whispered, "Gerhard, whatever you decide soon."
What followed over the next 48 hours would send shockwaves through the very foundation of the Vatican. If you and I look closely at the 24 hours after that door closed, 3 events unfolded that the public has yet to connect. First, Müller abruptly canceled 2 major international speaking engagements, one in Texas, the other in Madrid. Both were high-profile traditionalist conferences expected to draw massive crowds and intense media scrutiny. Yet his office offered only a vague one-line excuse citing personal reasons. Second,
two of the specific foundations named by the Pope released strangely defensive statements asserting their complete independence from any single prelate. Although these organizations named no names, they did not have to, as any sharp observer immediately understood which cardinal they were cutting ties with. Third, and perhaps most shocking of all, Cardinal Müller failed to deliver his customary weekly interview to the conservative media outlets that depended on him. He vanished from the public eye completely, leaving emails unread and phone calls unanswered. The sudden silence caught the immediate attention of Vatican watchers. By the second day of this blackout, 3 other influential cardinals from the same network hastily requested private audiences with the Pope, but were cold-shadowed and told to submit their requests in writing first. The implications were unmistakable. The days of back-channel access and backroom influence inside the Apostolic Palace were finished. On the third day of this quiet crisis, a high-ranking official within the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith leaked a brief, telling statement to an investigative reporter. He noted simply that the Pope is not afraid, and people are finally starting to realize that. Yet, the truly critical detail of that tense 90-minute meeting has escaped the notice of almost the entire Catholic world. Pope Leo XIV did not strip Müller of his titles, nor did he remove him from any of his official commissions, choosing instead to avoid any public censure. Rather than punishing the cardinal in the traditional manner, the Pope made a far more strategic move. Although he possessed the full weight of canonical authority to crush him, Leo chose a different path by presenting him with a choice. This is where you and I see the stark contrast between this new pontificate and the political warfare of the past decade. Pope Leo XIV does not destroy his adversaries. He confronts them with overwhelming evidence, speaks the truth, and demands they choose their path. The entire Curia now realizes that if the Pope can dismantle the Church's most powerful conservative voice with such clinical precision, he can easily do it to anyone else. The illusion of secrecy has vanished within the ancient walls of the Vatican. In the days following that closed-door meeting, sources inside the Roman Curia describe a massive shift in behavior. Cardinals who spent years building independent media platforms are suddenly and quietly reconsidering their next moves. Bishops preparing controversial public declarations have abruptly postponed them. Even the wealthy foundations that funded opposition campaigns are now reviewing their leadership boards under intense scrutiny. Donors are asking entirely different questions. The entire architecture of internal opposition is looking fragile, and the root cause is not fear in the traditional sense. What these men are actually confronting is a sovereign who holds all the cards. Pope Leo XIV has demonstrated something the Catholic Church has not witnessed in generations: a pontiff who knows exactly what is happening, who possesses the internal documents, the names, and the evidence, and who chooses when to deploy them. He never leaks. He does not issue loud threats or sit down for interviews to complain about his rivals. Instead, he simply opens folders and speaks in quiet, measured tones across a small table in his private library. Those who hear those soft words leave his presence entirely changed. His opponents cannot even complain publicly, because doing so would force them to admit the devastating truths contained in those files. To speak out would mean verifying every compromised letter, every hidden email, and every questionable financial transaction. They would be forced to confess before the world the very actions they spent years denying under oath. Consequently, they choose absolute silence, which becomes a damning confession of its own. Consider the case of Cardinal Müller, who reportedly fled back to his quiet hometown in Germany 2 days ago. He is currently hiding out in a modest home owned by a lifelong friend, refusing all incoming phone calls from the media. 3 of his scheduled book promotional events have been abruptly canceled, and he has vanished from the public eye. Inside sources claim he is rethinking his entire future, weighing options that could lead to obedience or open rebellion. Retiring completely from public life or attempting to negotiate behind closed doors are both on the table for the embattled cardinal. Every potential path before him leads to a vastly different outcome, carrying heavy consequences that will forever reshape his legacy. One thing remains undeniable. The broken man who walked out of that library was not the proud figure who had entered it. Watching from the sidelines, other prelates who staked their careers on resisting this papacy are deeply unsettled. They now realize that this pope, whom they dismissed as a weak compromise candidate, is methodical, highly informed, and entirely unafraid. In his morning homily just hours later, the Pope delivered a coded warning that went completely unnoticed by the public. During that quiet morning service, the pontiff declared that the Church is not a battleground for human ambitions, but a home for souls. He warned that anyone who has forgotten this truth, regardless of their rank or title, must either remember it or step aside. Keeping his eyes fixed on his prepared text, his voice remained as cold and level as it had been during his confrontation with Müller the night before. While the ordinary faithful in St. Peter's Basilica heard only pious words, the target audience understood the message perfectly. We are witnessing a critical turning point for the Roman Catholic Church. For more than a decade, internal rebellion and organized opposition to papal reform were tolerated, as if they were just standard bureaucratic politics. Powerful conservative organizations once operated with complete impunity, funding aggressive campaigns directly targeting the Holy See. Elaborate conferences were routinely organized with the sole intention of presenting rival prelates as alternative sources of moral authority. This flagrant insubordination became normal, expected, and practically institutionalized within the Vatican. But that comfortable era is coming to a sudden end. Pope Leo XIV is not launching a noisy crusade against dissent. Instead, he has done something far more dangerous to his critics. He has made the conflict intensely personal, private, and specific. By showing his enemies that he has the receipts and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to strike, he has paralyzed them. Müller was merely the first. He will not be the last. Vatican insiders whisper that more of these private, high-stakes confrontations are scheduled to take place in the coming weeks. A long list of targeted cardinals, bishops, and influential prelates are about to face the exact same quiet treatment. Each will be summoned to a room with a small table, 2 glasses of water, and a pope who holds their entire secrets in his hands. The specific charges and the evidence will be customized for each individual, but the underlying ultimatum will remain identical. The era of a parallel church operating in the shadows is over. The factions dividing the Vatican are being systematically dismantled. The careers of cardinals who rose to prominence by attacking the papacy are coming to a permanent close. And the man orchestrating this quiet purge never has to raise his voice. An overlooked detail from that historic night reveals the sheer psychological weight of the encounter. According to an eyewitness within the Apostolic Palace, Cardinal Müller did not immediately leave after his dramatic audience with the Pope ended. Instead, he collapsed into a chair in a quiet, dimly lit antechamber, sitting completely alone for nearly an hour with his head buried in his hands. None of the passing Swiss guards dared to disturb him, and the domestic staff pointedly looked away, pretending he was not there. When he finally gathered the strength to stand and step out into the freezing Roman air, he refused to call his driver. He chose to walk for nearly 40 minutes through the dark cobblestone streets, passing silent fountains and shuttered cafes in a daze. He had entered the Eternal City believing he was an untouchable power broker, only to wander its streets as a defeated man. Whatever Cardinal Müller ultimately decides to do in the coming weeks, the eyes of the entire global Catholic community will be fixed on him. The chilling message Pope Leo XIV delivered during that single 90-minute meeting has been received loud and clear by every potential dissenter. The Supreme Pontiff knows everything. He sees everything, and he is only getting started. If this investigation has gripped you, and if you believe the Church needs leaders who govern with hard truth rather than public theatrics, share your thoughts below. Join me as we uncover what happened when a second cardinal entered that same library just 3 days later. What transpired next is even more shocking.